Welcome to the Psychology World podcast. I'm Connor Whiteley, bringing you psychology news, articles, and other interesting psychology-related articles. Where you can find the podcast notes and more interesting psychology-related things, and you can get your free 8 psychology book box set at connorwhiteley.net. Now let's get on to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 115 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, and today's episode is on 4 factors of effective therapy. So this is a really good episode that I really enjoy writing and also talking about it in the content part of today's episode, because these factors are really important for us to understand as university students and also as psychology professionals, just so we can help deliver proper psychotherapy. Yes, this is a really good episode that I really do recommend. So that's coming up in the content part of today's episode. But moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, rage over repetitive movements. Could it be misokinetic? You were maybe aware of misophonia, an automatic intense hatred of certain types of sounds such as chewing, tapping and breathing, to name a few. Misophonia entered mainstream awareness relatively recently, but hot on its heels is an extremely similar condition that relates not to sound but to movement, misokinetics. There are several well-established online support groups for those who relate to having strong negative affective responses to certain types of stimuli, typically small repetitive movements such as shaking hands or finger tapping, and whilst it appears to be widespread, there has been a lack of dedicated research into the phenomenon until now. So I know that I tend to say this quite a bit, but I think that this is great that we do keep pushing the boundaries of what we're researching, because I had no idea that this condition existed, and the same for the other one to do with the sounds. So this is really interesting, and it'd be good to see some of the research that comes up from this, because for my literature review for my psychology placement, I know what it's like to try and find studies for something that just has so much limited research though. So it's always good when there is more research done on it, because then we learn a lot more and things become a lot more interesting. So it's always good that we do keep pushing the boundaries. So this next one's quite interesting. Left-wing authoritarianism is real and needs to be taken seriously in political psychology, study argues. Authoritarianism has been well established by psychologists. Well, right-wing authoritarianism has. In fact, as there's typically the only type of that studies, you might be forgiven for thinking that's what all authoritarianism is. Well, I know that I did. The very idea of left-wing authoritarianism has received only a little academic attention, but a lot of skepticism from psychologists. But researchers behind a new paper concluded that left-wing authoritarianism does indeed exist, and define not only its characteristics, but the characteristics of people who subscribe to it. They also reveal substantial similarities between authoritarianisms on the political right and left. So this, I think, is just quite mind-blowing, to be honest, because as I talk about in my new personality psychology book that I do talk about the impact of right-wing authoritarianism and its really negative effects because of the damaging impacts that it has in people's attitudes towards equalities and other social groups that aren't their own. So the idea that this left authoritarianism is very, I think it's very strange, because right-wing authoritarianism is what we know. So the idea that there's something else, so hopefully this will get a lot more academic attention though, and I think that I'll save this for the next time I do a personality psychology second edition. Yeah, but that won't be for you, isn't it? So the last one is, language proficiency can determine how similarly first and second languages are represented in the brain. Researchers widely agree that first and second languages are handled similarly in the brain. According to previous research, proficiency bilinguals' brain activity is broadly quite similar when accessing their first and second languages. However, the literature exploring this until now has relied on imaging methods that can tell us where in the brain the activity is, but not how languages are represented in those areas. Distinct patterns of activation may have differentiated, completely butchered that, first and second languages in those same regions all at this time, whereby relying on traditional forms of imaging analysis alone, we have been none otherwise. Thanks to new imaging methods, however, we're able we're able to take a look at the activation in these areas in a much more detailed way. Now, newly published work suggests that languages are sometimes represented more distinctly than we thought. So the reason why I wanted to look at this one was because it touches on developmental psychology and also a biological psychology, which are always of interest about, and also because language is such a critical cognitive function. So to be honest, it actually touches so many areas of psychology, like this one. That's it's always good to look at, and it also shows why we also need to keep coming up with new research methods and also exploring new avenues of investigation. Because if we didn't keep pushing, and if we didn't keep wanting to find out more, then we also wouldn't find out about this. So all of these are very interesting, and also shows how the future of our psychology could become a lot brighter and a lot more interesting, and because it pulls on all of these different research methods and all of these different avenues that we have yet to explore. Because to be honest, the more we find stuff, the more questions that are created, and that's the great thing about psychology and also about all sciences. So that's enough for the psychology news section. Then move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So about this week has been the first full week of my placement, because it feels like last week it was all to do with meetings. So it was really good to dive into this literature really properly, and I really am enjoying the topic of health apps. So these mobile mental health apps. To be honest, they're so new and they're quite novel, and because they've only come mainstream of recently, I'm actually quite surprised how far some of the research goes. These apps even go back as far as 2014, which I know in mainstream literature that's really new. But in terms of these apps, and also if you think about this, where the technology was back in 2014, I'm actually quite surprised they were any good whatsoever. So all in all, I really am enjoying that, and thankfully I can definitely tell that my academic writing is improving. That I'm actually really pleased with, because as part of my coursework that I actually need to show with the actual university, well, you have to do a reflective log, and the thing that I'm finding quite surprising about it all is that how much reflection I can actually do, but it's also nice to actually validate and actually see that you are improving, because you will write down tips. But as I'm doing this as an actual book that are released to everyone, I'm just so they can see the benefits of doing a placement year, and they can also see what it's like as a whole, and not just an academic a placement there. It's filled up with tons of tips. So I'm actually quite looking forward to releasing that. But of course, I actually need to finish my placement first. So that I'm actually quite looking forward to. And I think lots of university students will actually find that quite useful. Yep, so besides from that, the only interesting thing that I've got to tell you about is that I'm assured that Police Psychology will be up on a pre-order by Monday. So by the time that you listen to this, to this episode of Police Psychology, I really do love. And to be honest, because what's happening in the UK with the Severe Everett murder, I think that this book was actually quite timely written, and it's actually available at pre-order. So I really do recommend that book, mainly because of the police culture sections, which if you're in the UK, then you'll know that that's a major issue at the moment. To be honest, I don't talk about the Severe Everett situation, but you could read in between the lines about why changing police culture would not happen easily, or as easily as everyone is hoping that is. So it's very interesting, and I cannot recommend that book enough. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can also tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi I always love to hear from all of you. And today's episode has been sponsored by Clinical Psychology. So this is an absolute brilliant book that I really do recommend for you, because it's engaging and it's really easy to understand. It's if you want to know about clinical psychology, it's what it is, what populations is it, it covers, and also some of the models of therapy, and also so much more. Then I cannot recommend this great book enough. And even if you're just thinking that you might want to study clinical psychology, this book is a great introduction to the entire field of our clinical psychology, so I really do recommend it. And also introduces you to the more advanced topics, for example, formulation in psychotherapy, which I then whipped out into its own book with something like 18,000 words. And then it also goes to talk about the different models of being an actual therapist. For example, the reflective practitioner, and also some of the other ones. So I really do recommend that's a great book. book there because it will really help your understanding of what clinical psychology is. So that is a Clinical Psychology, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback, large print and hardback versions from Amazon at your local bookstore and a local library if you request it. And you can order the audiobook from all major audiobook retailers. And there's the option to buy me a coffee if you want to support me because of one particular episode. So you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/Connor. So let's dive into the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about the really interesting topic of 4 factors that make effective therapy. And the reason why I wanted to do today's episode was because within clinical psychology, the topic of effective therapy is really difficult to answer because what's effective for one person might not be effective for another person. And whilst this topic touches on lots of other sub-topics like formulation, it turns out that there are globally agreed markers for whether or not a course of psychotherapy has been effective or not, and that's the focus of today's episode. 4 factors of effective therapy. So according to a new study, which you can find on the blog post at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, there are 4 factors or pillars that are globally recognised as what makes for effective therapy. Personally, I think this is really useful. Useful upon considering how difficult therapy can be to judge because, as I mentioned earlier, a particular psychotherapy might work for one person but not another, or it could work well in one area for a person but terribly in the exact same area than another person. So it is quite confusing, but that's what makes it quite complex but really interesting too. So the entire point of today's episode is just to increase all of our awareness about what makes good therapy so we can potentially use this in the future. Self-knowledge. There are lots of examples in psychotherapy of giving our clients an increase of self-knowledge. For example, getting them to understand their behaviour is maladaptive, getting them to realise their behaviour might need to change, and getting them to realise some of the damaging relationships they have in their life. Meaning, self-knowledge is about getting our clients to understand themselves better and to have a clear view of themselves and to their life. And they're aware of different aspects and feelings, and they understand their own emotions. Because that is really challenging because under normal situations, we don't understand our own emotions. But then when you've got a mental health condition, understanding our own emotions can be even more important. That's really critical in therapy. Because the maladaptive behaviour of lashing out, for example, tends to be a maladaptive response to a situation and social emotion that we just simply don't know how to handle. Overall, self-knowledge and expanding a client's accurate self-awareness and self-acceptance is a great sign of effective therapy, which leads us on to the next point. Self-acceptance. So if you've ever read or done social psychology, then you need to know that the self is made up of lots of different components and selves, which can sometimes lead to decreases in mental health if people don't accept certain parts of themselves, or it can lead to a vicious cycle. For example, if we say depression, when a person gets depression, then the depression could arguably be part of the self. I was sort of a bit, is that really true? But it actually is, like it turns out. Then, if a person doesn't accept the depression as part of themselves, then they can believe that they're messed out or they're diseased. That's the new one that I've heard of recently. And this all leads to them not accepting it themselves also, and this can lead to further decreases in mental health because they feel guilty about being messed up. Of course, they aren't, and that's why self-acceptance is so important. But another example is that if we take the client is gay or part of the LGBT plus community and they live with conservative or non-accepting family, then they might not be able to accept themselves, and we really don't need to do too much internet reading to discover the horrific mental health side effects that this can have on people. So again though, when a therapy has been effective, our client's ability to accept all of themselves has increased. Consideration of others. So whilst the description in the study of this is very technical, I'm going to make it a lot more understandable. Therefore, consideration of others, those are clients' feelings of empathy and their ability to understand and consider others in terms of their viewpoints, perspectives and feelings. Of course, the client doesn't have to agree with them because, let's face it, we don't agree with everyone's point of view. Like, I'm sure that I've said some stuff in the past that you've disagreed with, but it's all about understanding others. external psychon considering perspectives. So it's important for them to show mutual respect to others, and some people may be more familiar with this as intersubjectivity, where people do this together and make room for each other with mutual respect and understanding. Relationship quality. So this is probably the easiest marker of effective therapy, because this is clearly seen in most therapies. For example, systemic therapy is based on improving relationships in the family system. Therefore, effective therapy can be seen as an improvement in our clients' relationships, and they can get a greater satisfaction from them. And then this links to other topics, because without consideration of others and empathy, then this just can't happen. Whilst every therapy should be individualised for each client, as I talk about in formulation in psychotherapy, I really hope that these 4 factors can help you judge if a particular therapy was successful, so you can learn from experience and help more people in the future. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I hope that you got something out of it, and hope this will be useful to you in the future. So if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And please check out Clinical Psychology. It's an absolute brilliant book that I really do recommend, because it will be so useful to you, whether it's now or in the future, especially if you're just starting to think that you might want to get into clinical psychology, and it's available in all of the usual places. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see the show notes, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. And if you want a free 8-book psychology box set, then please go to connorwhiteley.net. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.